Hello and welcome to Filled with His Love. I'm trying something for the first time on this podcast. Lolly and I recently saw the movie Project Hail Mary. If you haven't seen the movie, it's a story about a scientist who tries to save the world from extinction. His name in the movie is Ryland Grace, and I don't think the author named him Grace by chance. You can now stream it free on Amazon Prime if you haven't seen it. It's a space odyssey based on a science fiction novel by Andy Weir. And even though science fiction is not my thing, it's really not my thing, this movie interested me on several levels, particularly regarding relationships, which is the focus of this podcast. So while in space, hundreds of light years away from Earth, Ryland Grace meets up with Rocky, a five-legged, rock-like organism from the planet Eridani 40, or in short, Erid. Rocky is trying to save his planet Erid, and Grace is trying to save his planet Earth. The relationship between these two very different creatures can teach us a lot, I believe, about relationships. So, I began wondering, what if I could interview Ryland Grace? I have lots of questions I'd like to ask him, but he's a fictional character from a novel, now a blockbuster movie. So I decided to try something unusual. And you have to kind of bear with me here. What if I conducted a simulated interview with Grace? I'd ask the questions as myself, and AI would help me imagine how Grace might respond. It seems only fitting that a little science should assist in an interview with a planet-saving scientist. So these aren't Andy Weir's words or the movie's script. They're my attempt, with a little help from AI, to explore what Ryland Grace might say if we sat down for a thoughtful conversation. So let's jump into it. Me. I want to welcome you to my podcast today, Grace, and I hope it's okay if I call you Grace because Rocky almost always called you Grace in the movie. Grace, sure. Everyone calls me Grace. Me. First, I want to know your first thought when you saw Rocky for the first time. That was quite a scene in the movie. Rocky was obviously not human, and he kind of looked like a giant tarantula. So how did you feel during that first encounter? Grace. Well, honestly, my first thought was, this is how I die. I mean, I'm only in space, exhausted, confused half the time, and suddenly I come face to face with what looks like a giant armored spider. Not exactly comforting, but fear only lasted so long because Rocky didn't behave like a monster. He behaved like, well, a scientist. Careful, curious, cautious. And once we started trying to communicate, something shifted for me. I realized we were both carrying basically the same burden. He was trying to save Erid. I was trying to save Earth. That creates a connection pretty fast. Also, I really need to emphasize this. I am absolutely certain Rocky thought I looked horrifying too. Me. How did you know that Rocky thought you were as horrifying as he might be to you? Oh, because once we could actually communicate a little, Rocky stopped being polite about it. He basically told me humans look fragile and deeply unsettling. Too soft, too wet, too many things sloshing around internally, which honestly is fair. But that ended up being important. It forced us to move beyond appearance pretty quickly, because when someone is helping keep you alive, your brain eventually stops asking, does this being look like me? And starts asking, can I trust him? Me. That is such an important point. And I think it applies to all of us when we can look past each other's differences and start to see the power in the other person that may be hidden in some way. Grace. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. At first, Rocky and I mostly noticed what was strange about each other. Different biology, different language, different world. But over time, those differences became almost secondary. What started to matter was character. Was he loyal, honest, courageous? Did he care about others more than himself? And Rocky absolutely did. Me. It makes us stop and think, what is intelligence after all? Grace. I think humans sometimes confuse intelligence with familiarity. If someone thinks like us, talks like us, shares our assumptions, we label them intelligent almost automatically. But Rocky forced me to rethink that completely. He was deeply intelligent, not just technically intelligent, but relationally intelligent too. Loyal, cooperative, curious, self-sacrificing. Me. So when did you actually start to care for Rocky? Grace. I think it happened gradually at first, and then, I don't know, all at once. In the beginning, we were mostly just two scientists trying to solve problems together. But then little things started happening. Rocky would notice when I was exhausted. He worried when I was in danger. And eventually, I realized Rocky wasn't helping me because helping Earth benefited Arid. He was helping me because I was his friend. Me. Sacrifice is such an important part of all this. Maybe sacrifice is always a part of a caring relationship. Grace. That's a really interesting point because I don't think either of us decided one day that we valued the other more than ourselves. It grew out of shared struggle. We solved impossible problems together. We saved each other repeatedly. At first, sacrifice feels costly. Later, it almost feels natural. Me. I want to hear you talk more about this moral responsibility that you felt toward Rocky and his people. Grace. Before I met Rocky, humanity was mostly an abstraction to me. But Rocky made another world personal. Suddenly, Arid wasn't just an alien planet. It was families, children, history, music, people he loved. Once you truly love someone, it becomes almost impossible not to care about what they care about. Me. I must say that as you respond to that question, I can't help thinking about the example of Enos in the Book of Mormon. You know, at that moment when Enos felt forgiven, he immediately wanted to reach out to help the Lamanites. Grace. Maybe one of the signs that a person is changing morally is that concern begins expanding outward. At first, survival is very self-focused, but once fear loosens its grip a little, compassion widens. It takes over. Me. A sort of oneness developed between you and Rocky. Grace. Yeah. In the beginning, cooperation was almost transactional. But eventually it stopped being, how do we save our planets, and became, how do I help my friend? Friendship created a kind of emotional unity. Me. This emotional unity is way deeper than just finding something in common with another person. Grace. I think Rocky would completely agree with that idea. What surprised me most wasn't just that we learned about each other. It's that we became different because of each other. Relationships are transformational. Me. It's kind of like that song, in Wicked where it says, "You changed me for good." Grace. Yeah, exactly. The most important people in our lives don't just help us, they alter us. Rocky didn't just become important to me. He became part of who I was. Me. I read today an account of someone remembering all the good sayings her mother left her. Grace. That's beautiful. People don't influence us only through memories. Their words become part of our inner voice. Maybe one of the real signs of love is that another person's goodness keeps echoing inside you long after the conversation itself is over. Me. That's why I like your name, Grace. Grace. Maybe grace is partly this mysterious power that helps beings grow beyond fear and selfishness into connection and love. And if that's true, then just maybe, relationships themselves are one of the primary ways grace enters our lives. Me. I definitely believe that it is through relationships that grace enters our lives, particularly our relationship with God. Grace. At first, survival felt mostly intellectual to me. But over time, I realized that what really sustained me emotionally wasn't just knowledge, it was relationship, trust, connection, the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I really appreciate the time we've had together today, Grace. Grace, thank you for letting me talk about this. Most people mainly want to ask me about astrophage or relativistic physics. But honestly, when I look back on the experience, the science almost feels secondary to the relationship. If an anxious middle school science teacher from Earth and a giant ammonia-breathing engineer from Arid can learn to love and trust each other, then maybe people here on Earth can move beyond some of the barriers they've built too. Okay, now this is my reflection now. Now just a few thoughts as I reflect on this interview. Andy Weir's book and the film Project Hail Mary focus a lot on science, particularly on astrophage, a single-celled alien organism it's about the size of a typical cell that can absorb stellar energy. Of course, astrophage is Andy Weir's invention. After all, the film is science fiction, and this substance is totally fictional. So many who read the book or watch the film fixate on the science aspect of the movie because they want to understand more about this. I've had several conversations with those who have read the book and seen the film, and they are often surprised that I focused primarily on the relationship between Grace and Rocky, while they focused on the science and astrophage. Here's the lesson I take from this. As humans, we often underestimate the importance of relationships. We assume they'll take care of themselves. So we seldom think intentionally about how to nurture and strengthen them. Here are two very different beings who are willing to sacrifice themselves so that the other might live and return home. Rocky almost dies trying to save Grace, and then Grace forsakes his own trip back to Earth, at least for the time being, so that he can save Rocky and return with him to his planet. Fortunately, most of us will never face life and death decisions like Grace and Rocky. Marlon Brando once said, "If we are not our brother's keeper, at least let us not be his executioner." Let me say that again. If we are not our brother's keeper, as it says in the Bible, at least let us not be his executioner. Rocky did not want to be Grace's executioner, and Grace did not want to watch Rocky die. So each became his brother's keeper. We don't often see relationships in our own lives as this consequential. I don't imagine that my relationship could lead to a person's execution, but we are always either giving life to one another or diminishing it in some way. A harsh word or action can drain the life out of a friend or family member. A hug or smile can give life. I liked the scene in the film where Grace wraps his arms around Rocky's enclosure, this kind of glass-looking flexible plastic enclosure, to give him his first hug. Rocky says, "How do you know when the hug is done?" And Grace says, "Oh, you just feel it." Rocky, "Oh, are you feeling it now?" Ryland Grace, "Nope." So they had to hug a little longer because Grace was saying, "No, we haven't hugged long enough yet." Grace wants to hug a little longer, but Rocky is thinking like an engineer. He assumes there must be a rule for how long a hug should last. Grace gently teaches him that some of life's most meaningful moments aren't governed by algorithms. They're guided by feelings. One of my personal goals is to give life to others and avoid as much as I possibly can anything that would take away life from someone else. Our closeness to God and to others defines our life. Relationships are the source of our deepest joys. Everything else is simply background. And when we truly see one another, care for one another, and give life to one another, as Rocky would say, and these are Rocky's words throughout the movie, I just love this, he would say, "Amazing, amazing, amazing." So I hope this is helpful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.